I think that... Okay. Last shot. First Peter chapter 5. And where I want to begin actually is the first word of chapter 5. Again, because it's so important that we understand the context of this. And as we try to wrap it up, Nancy, I was listening to Nancy teach, and she just kept saying over and over and over again, like, these things are connected. She kept saying that. These things are connected. These things are connected. And that's what I wanted to talk about, is the connection of these things. And so the first connection that I want us to see is that chapter 5, when he begins, so, and he gives an admonition, right? So, he says, I exhort the elders. What's the so? So I exhort the elders is because of what he is describing at the end of chapter 4, which is what? Suffering is coming. And it's going to be really, really hard. And it's going to be really, really difficult. And I want you to know that this is should be expected. This isn't, don't be shocked when life gets difficult and your faith is challenged. And I don't mean like you got to work through a deep thought, meaning that your faith is opposed and you have to make a declaration or a stand, which is a word that we're going to see in chapter 5. And so in light of the fact that not everybody's excited that you follow Jesus, you got a bunch of people that don't care, you got a bunch of people that are recognizing that your faith can cast their lack of faith in a bad light. And the world has learned how to use words like judgmental to shut us up. Okay, and I really believe the demonic side of that is a means that the devil has used to silence the church, to silence Christian people. Is when I talk with Christians, they are more in fear of being deemed judgmental by their friends than they are being wrong by God. Far more concerned about others than they are about God. And I think that's not a good way to be. So you have the suffering that's going to come, and then so he says, so I exhort you elders. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about. And to see how these ideas go together. Leaders, and he describes what the leaders are going to do. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then beyond the leaders aspect, he then begins to talk about, let me see the second one I want to talk about. That's right. I was going to get those backwards. Leaders, and then he goes into a discussion on humility. And then he begins a discussion on anxiety. And then he ends up kind of holding this all together with an appeal or an understanding of God. So leaders, humility, anxiety, and God. And one of the things that's interesting is at the end of letters, I always think of 1 Thessalonians when this happens. In 1 Thessalonians 5, the Apostle Paul seems to just give a bunch of random ideas. Hey, by the way, pray for your elders, treat your wives well, make sure you get a Happy Meal on the way home from church on Sunday. And it's just literally these random ideas. It's like people look at them and it's like, if you even take a look at a translation, it's like lots of really short paragraphs, which is their way of saying what? These aren't really connected thoughts. But I think they actually are connected thoughts. We just have to try to figure out where the connections are. And it might not sound, what do you mean, leaders, humility, anxiety, and God? So the context that we consistently see in the book of 1 Peter is the context of suffering and the oppositional culture. And what he seems to then say is, but here's the good news, and I don't know if we think like this. Here's the good news, is that in this world where there is opposition, don't worry, you have leaders. How many of you go, okay, here's the hard news. The hard news is that the world is a really terrible place. And the hard news is that there's lots of people out there that are seeking like a lion to devour us. Okay? But the good news is we have a government. The good news is we have a president. The good news is we have a Congress. How many of you, when you look at the news, just go, oh, I'm so glad for Washington? And I don't mean the president. I literally mean all that's represented in the city, Washington, D.C. How many of you look at all of the problems that are going on in the world? You know, if we didn't have Washington... You know, if we didn't have Republicans and Democrats and independents, I don't know where I would be today. How many of you, this is going to matter quite a bit actually. How many of you, when you look at the complexities of the world, actually consider Washington to be part of the problem? Huh? And how does that make you feel? A little anxious. Now, let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. That's because these aren't random ideas. They're not random ideas. Even when Nancy was drawing into the Ephesian material, it's very interesting that Ephesian stand, Nancy said, you know, and you have, and you have, and you have. You've heard us talk about this. The you in Ephesians 5 about what you have is actually not you. Singular. It's you have. It's intentionally plural, I think. I don't think Paul's talking about, well, you have, and you have, and you have. No, he's saying, hey, by the way, you have. Like, here's what you have. So, in the crazy world that God allows us to be in, and I would even say has called us by our faith in Jesus Christ to actively engage, right? That's what happens with faith. When we decide to be in the kingdom of God, we make a stand, we declare a king, which now opposes all other kings. Think about it. It's not just some simple statement, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. That is to declare a side. So when you decided to follow Jesus, you made a declaration. Do you understand that? I'll ask you again. Do you understand that? Right? I mean, it is so good for us to go, yeah, like I made a side. I took a stand. And by the way, there is an opposition, right? We know that. There is an opposition. Here's the beauty of it. You're not crazy if you go, I can't do this. Like, I can't do this. I can't make it. I would say to you, man, that actually is such a humble statement, because the truth is you can't. You really can't make it. You were never designed to try to make it. That was never the intention of this. This is where our culture, so now as we're applying it in 2019, what is fundamentally different is the excessive way in which we read and interpret the scriptures as an individual. not as a plurality. So we don't even look at it the way that Paul is looking at it. So us standing firm and us putting on the full armor of God is a little boy dressing up in a skit with a shield and a helmet and a belt, and that's what he's going to go do when he goes to school on Tuesday. That's kind of the plan. That's not what Paul's describing, actually. It's not what he's even doing. He is saying, hey, like you guys, when you come together and you called out ones of God, you disciples of Jesus, followers of Him, you make sure you do this. That's what he's saying. And so everything fundamentally changes when this functions properly, doesn't it? And by the way, it was really kind of interesting. Two comments. I love just listening. Two comments were made, which I thought were kind of interesting. One is a series of comments that I loved hearing examples of leaders who were really, really humble and helpful. Okay, I thought that's awesome. And Jesus washed feet, all that stuff. I think that's absolutely great. The other part that's really interesting is that in reality, as wonderful as that is, and as I would even argue as non-negotiable as that is, that washing feet is a mandatory exercise of a leader. Okay. No matter where you are, it is mandatory. Jesus seems to say that. We don't work like the world leads. Okay? We lead like Jesus led, and He washed feet. So that to me is mandatory. It's not an either or. It's that and. But here's the little bit of the problem is that I don't know if in the church there's a lot of courage. That was the other statement that was made. Was it you, Annetta? Did you make that statement? Yeah, warriors, not worriers. And what I find really interesting is that even in church culture now, what's really, really popular is, we need to get a bunch of leaders who are really careful. And we need a bunch of leaders who are, really going to make sure that we're careful. And because there are difficult times out there, and we really need to be, right? One of the most desired attributes in people I see right now is like cautiousness. And if anything, if we could be overly cautious. I've never had parents come and say, hey, I know you guys are going on a trip. Hey, listen, make sure you have fun. And if it gets a little dangerous, that's fine. It's like, no, can you make sure that everyone wears their helmet when you get in the van? Well, they're high school kids. I know, but the helmets would be good. And can you put like 7 seat belts on each of them? And it's just kind of like, okay. I mean, there is this excessiveness. And hear me, I'm that guy. Okay? I was the one that up until my high school days, whenever my this is embarrassing, and I'm not even exaggerating in this moment. When my parents were gone, up into the high school days, whenever they didn't have cell phones, whenever they weren't coming home, I would just sit and worry that something might have happened to them. So I worried a lot. Worry, anxiety is part of my makeup. And here's why, is because God never promised me that my parents wouldn't die in a car accident. And so, what else am I supposed to do but worry? Like, I totally trust that God might allow my parents to die in a car accident. Totally trust that He would allow that to happen. There are some people that would the reason why they trust God is because they genuinely believe God would never allow that to happen. And I guess I just go, I'm sorry, I've done the math, and I don't think that makes a lot of sense. So I just decide to worry instead. Anybody else know what I'm talking about? See, what leaders are designed by God, if you take a look at this, notice how it's not. I mean, and by the way, again, there's nothing wrong with the examples of Ryan Vincent washing your feet. I think that's a great example. I think it's foundational. I really believe that. But tell me there's more. So I exhort the elders among you as fellow elders and witnesses, and as a witness of the sufferings of Christ Jesus, as well as a partaker in the glory that is coming to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. Okay? So by the way, one of the ways in which we're example is we serve. But think about the context. These are people you're in charge of. Therefore, do not be domineering. Think of the context. If I'm telling a leader, don't be domineering. Tell me what's happening. Like, describe the context. If someone needs to be warned, don't be domineering. I doubt if they do that with nurses. Hey, when you go in there and you're changing the bedpans, try not to be domineering. But do you think maybe they need to say that to head coaches? Or, I mean, not that we would, I promise you. But do you think maybe like a police force needs to hear, be careful being domineering? Do you think like a sergeant or a general leading a charge probably needs to be reminded, hey, be careful? Maybe like the CEO of a company, what would you say to the CEO? Hey, be careful what? Do you see the context of who you warn about being domineering and who you don't have to warn being domineering? So then the context is, hey, you're in charge of people. The context is there is a war that is going on and people are afraid. And so as you lead them, don't be domineering. Like, add it up. Like, as much as it's absolutely wonderful that there is this, and maybe that's even why Jesus points out, when you wash someone's feet, they know the degree to which you will love them. And maybe when you wash someone's feet, they can hear you like say difficult things to them. So do you see the context of this? And I would even say that a lot of the spiritual anxiety that exists in the church today, and it's crazy to believe that somehow that doesn't apply to Sunnybrook. But a lot of the anxiety exists because I don't know if I trust our leaders. Nothing bad about any one of them. Seriously. It's not even, this is what I find that's going on right now. You can let me know if I'm wrong. It's not like I have anything against Alan or Mark or the other Mark or Jeff or the other Jeff. It's not like I have anything against any of them. I just know people. How many of you think like this? And when push comes to shove, everybody seems to do what's best for them. Seriously, I do not want to disparage anyone on staff because they seem like the nicest people. They really do. And when things are going well, who doesn't believe Zane's not going to be there for you and your kids? He's totally going to be there. How many of you just kind of wonder, but back in the back of your mind, if push comes to shove? Like if push comes to shove, it was really interesting when I came, they don't do it anymore, but when I first moved here and I was 36 years old, I had a number of people that would meet with me for about the first year, and one of the primary questions they would ask when we would have lunch is, so how long do you think you'll stay? They would ask me that straight up. How long do you think you'll stay? And I would say, well, what are you talking about? Well, you know, you're 36. It's Stillwater, Oklahoma. Like, I'm sure another offer is going to come, and what have they got kind of in their mind? That Jim is glad to be here, by the way. Very grateful for the time that I have with you. But in the end, I'm taking care of who? Me. Like, Sunnybrook is just a stepping stone. I hope you know this. Like, you're not the best church in the world. You're not the biggest. You can't really, right? There's bigger. You guys know that, right? And so basically, right? Like that's how, I mean, this is why we kind of look amazed at one another at staff, because you will actually go to the other staff people and go, so how much longer do you think Ryan's going to be here until he gets like a church of his own? How much longer do you think Drew Moss will be here? Because he's good. What does that even mean, by the way? But how many of you have had those thoughts? Oh, good. Nobody. That's awesome. We have those thoughts. Because why? Because back in the back of our mind, we either don't trust our leaders because we know them and they're dangerous people. But even the good ones. But that's okay. We, as leaders, think the same about you. We know that you're really, really glad to be a part of our church, and you'll stay as long as it works for you. Like, it's a quid pro quo. Right? Like, we get it. We get it. I mean, I've been here for 15 years. I've seen people come. I've seen people go. I've seen people come and go and come and go and come back. Literally. There might have even been one more go and come back. Because why? Because in the end, when it comes down to it, like, I'm here to take care of, and this is the context of which Peter is saying, hey, listen, leaders, I need you to shepherd the flock. And that brings in all of the teachings of the Old Testament of God's warning of shepherds who are very clearly shepherding for their own purposes. They exploit the sheep. They use the sheep. They ignore the sheep. And God says, I will judge them. Now here's what I want us to actually see, is that, and I'm just trying to make statements, and then we can kind of wrestle with some of the applications. Like, some of our anxiety comes from the fact that we live in a time and also in a reality where leadership is like severely lacking. And that's where some of our anxiety is coming from. And that's why it takes a long time. I remember when I first came here in 2004, the elders, I don't know if it was all of them, but it was like a collective statement. The elders actually said to me, hey, listen, we had gone through a very difficult time in Sunnybrook's history, and they kind of said, hey, listen, and if it's best for us to step to the side, if that would be best, then I think we need to do that. And I looked at them and said, listen, I'm one of them. I'm not trying to make a statement. I so strongly disagree with that. Because if we're ever going to rebuild trust, I think we have to rebuild trust here. And so I kind of begged them that can just no one leave for a while. Because I don't think we'll ever get healthy unless we all stay together. And I was more than comfortable with every one of those men and valued and appreciated their willingness to shepherd the flock in a difficult time. See? So by the way, there is a connection between anxiety and leaders. These aren't random ideas. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this one, and I want to play with these two side by side. Part of the anxiety that comes with poor leaders at church is because you haven't seen good leadership at home. So, man alive, if I can't trust my mom and dad to stay together, then why would I trust one of you guys that I don't even know to make it work? Like, if I can't trust the most foundational aspect in my home to be stable, how am I supposed to go to church and find stability? If when push comes to shove, people make decisions that are best for them at the most foundational place, how do we ever move forward? And see, that's part of our culture, isn't it? Do you understand how that's so much ingrained inside of us? And so when leaders even want to stand up and say, hey, you should listen to me and you should follow me, I love to try to put myself in the position of somebody that's going, well, but my dad just walked out on my mom. And so, and I don't even know if they're able to process this way. Excuse me for not just wanting to follow you. Excuse me for not just wanting to jump along. Excuse me for not, I think it's very understandable, isn't it? And this is the context in which we live. It is like, I can't actually trust my mom to make a good decision, and you want me to trust you? Which, by the way, puts both a strain on this, But then also, by the way, what I love about this is it actually makes it also more important at the same time. Like I want us to understand the value and the importance of this in terms of dealing with this. And by doing it, first and foremost, by going, yeah, these aren't random ideas. Hey, by the way, leaders, and then I want to talk about like a character issue for a moment, and then I want to talk about a struggle that we all have, and then I want to end up by just kind of doing a quick God thing, and then we'll be done. Our context is a mess. Therefore, I extol you leaders, lead well. Just get a lot of scared people that you'll be leading. And the world is falling apart all around them. And they need to know down deep that you're there. And that you will not only wash their feet, but you will lead the charge, because we are warriors, not worriers. And that's important for us to understand. And that's the context. And I would even say, I don't know, people love to talk about like it's worse now or it was worse then. I don't know. It seems like it was really bad then. It seems like it's really bad now. And God's answer, by the way, interestingly enough, to suffering and anxiety and pride is leaders. That's one of his answers. That's why I love to remind people, and you can see why this can just completely fall apart. We took our kids to Mexico, and here's the full story. In Mexico, we built a community center in 2010, and then I think in 2011 or 2012, there were some serious problems in Mexico, and every church in America, except for us for a little while, refused to go there because it was dangerous. And we said, but we feel like we need to go. So we continued to go. Fast forward, it was probably 2015 or 2016. We're taking a group of students, and me and a number of others had gone every year, twice a year. And it really wasn't as bad. It wasn't like we weren't dodging bullets and stuff like that. It really wasn't. We did see houses that had been bombed by both the cartel and the government. Trish, you know what I'm talking about. You've seen a lot of this. It's definitely to try to say that you shouldn't be aware. You should be aware, but I never felt not safe. And so we took some high school students when it was, I think, clearly safer. And they come to the border, and you see people with like machine guns and masks up to here because they don't want you to know who they are, And our kids are just like, their eyes are this big, right? And then you get to where we're at, and it's like kids are playing and dogs are running around, and you kind of let your guard down, which I think it's even okay. You kind of let your guard down when we're at the site. And so I said to one of our young people, I said, isn't it kind of weird how just like 2 days ago, like you were freaking out and worried, and now all of a sudden, like you're not worried, like you were worried on the way down, but now you're not worried? And this person said to me, she said, I don't know if I would have been worried at all, but my mom and dad were freaking me out. Like they were the ones. Like I don't even know if I would have, I wouldn't even have known to really worry per se, but I had a mom and a dad that were freaking out about it. Which by the way, we're going to talk real briefly about the different kinds of this. There is an appropriate, like, concern, whatever you were, anxiety, anxiousness, whatever. There is an appropriateness of that. But this student was actually just saying to me that when her leaders, I love talking to kids that are like afraid. I don't do children's counseling, but sometimes like 12 or 13-year-old kids, their parents will say, hey, you should talk to the pastor, talk to Jim, talk to somebody about their fears. And I always ask, so you're worried, what are you worried about? And here's a real one that I deal with actually quite a bit, tornadoes. I don't know if you know this, but they happen around here quite a bit. And I have yet to really find a situation where a kid says to me, when I say to them, I say, wow, so you're afraid of tornadoes? Yeah, I'm afraid of tornadoes. And I just say, anybody else in your house afraid of tornadoes? Oh, yeah. Me and my mom, we run together. We run and cry and scream and yell. And, I was like, oh, okay. Me and my dad, you know what we do? And it's just kind of, okay, because not that a kid couldn't learn that on their own, right? Not that a kid couldn't learn that on their own. They could. But most often, when we freak out, and again, always think what I'm really talking about here is like spiritually speaking. Because there is a spiritual connection to anxiety. There's a spiritual connection to leadership. There's a spiritual connection here. Like a church under persecution will be overly anxious, wrongly anxious, sinfully anxious when... Like, when was the last time you said to an elder, hey, like, just one more thing, I need you to be courageous. I need you to not play it safe. Like, remember, we take a stand. Remember, like, we're willing to get shot at. Like, remember, that's why I was really proud of our elders when we were talking about the Mexico thing. I really loved the fact that our elders said, listen, like, we need to be appropriately concerned, but none of them said we shouldn't go. I know other churches where elders banned people from going. And I'm really glad we didn't. I think it said something about our leaders. But do you want a cautious leadership? Hey, listen, like it's getting complicated to talk about sexual identity. I'm really concerned that maybe we might be misunderstood. So why don't we just not talk about those things? You know, it's really, really a very controversial topic. I just don't think, can I tell you what I'm really concerned about? I'm really concerned that, I know we're trying to protect like our worship service so that God might be glorified, but what if somebody isn't kind of happy the fact that we're making them go through the side doors? I'm really concerned that somebody might not be happy with that. Okay, by the way, like I am too. But is caution the way our leaders should think? Or it would be more of like a boldness on cultural issues? A boldness. I mean, do you want your leaders to say, hey, like let's be strong here? Or do you want them to just, and I mean this on the negative sense, okay? And there's lots of room for additional conversation. Do you want your leaders, your spiritual leaders, to coddle you? Or to make you courageous, which, by the way, the word for that would be encourage. Coddle or encourage? Encourage. Like that's really important. Fight the good fight, Paul says in Timothy. Not run and hide and hopefully no one will get hurt. It's fight the fight. And that's what's happening in Peter. That's why the Apostle Paul is trying to point out, hey, leaders, like you do have a responsibility. Therefore, don't be domineering. Why? Because we're leading a charge. That's why you wash their feet. But if all a leader has ever done is, and this is even, and by the way, I think I'm guilty of this. I think I'm guilty many times of coddling. I think I'm guilty as I'm writing sermons. You might go, I don't see it. You don't have to. God is my judge. I feel it. I think I'm going to play this one more safe. I've done that. And maybe sometimes there was a wisdom in it, truly. But a lot of times I did you a disservice. And I really wish, truly, if you want to know how to encourage me, demand more from me. You want to know how to encourage our elders, demand more from them. Why? And it's okay for you to say this, because I'm afraid. And I don't want to be afraid anymore. Like I don't want to be afraid that that what's happening in our world today is going to shut us up and we're never going to be able to talk about the appropriateness of what it means to be a man and a woman, appropriateness of what marriage is and the appropriateness. Like, how many of you are getting a sense that all we're doing culturally is shrinking back, shrinking back, shrinking back? Anybody else get that sense? Who's causing that? Can I tell you? Yes, I mean, I think Satan's a big part of it, don't get me wrong. But again, I can't control him. But you know what we can do? We can lead with courage. We can demand more That's kind of one of the reasons. This is where my wife has been really good for me, because I'm the cautious one. And I remember when, and again, the examples are always up for debate. But I remember when we decided to give as an option for parents, and I was not only a pastor at that time, but I was also a parent. And it was, you need to surround your kids with other spiritual, godly people so that they can have other influences on their lives. We did a whole big thing where we were really emphasizing this. And Max came home and said, Dad, there's a guy at our church named Mike Hansen, and he's kind of a neat guy, and I'm really wanting to try to connect with him. And I'm like, oh, that'd be great. I like Mike. He's got diabetes like you. I think that would be a good connection. He's kind of a quieter guy, but yeah, I mean, oh yeah. And he's got a motorcycle. Oh, okay. Nothing wrong with guys with motorcycles. And I was wondering, he wants to go for like a ride on his motorcycle. And I said, yeah, why don't you ask your mom, see what she says? He says, I already did. She says it's up to you. I don't want to go on a motorcycle. And then Andrea just kept telling me, like, Jim, we don't operate like that. And the metaphors, the motorcycle is both a metaphor and a real reality, a dangerous reality. But I just remember when Mike put him on the back of his motorcycle and drove to Norman in a rainstorm to watch a race, and then called me at like 2:30 in the morning. Okay, we're heading back now. And I'm like, okay, hold on tight. I just remember, and Mike's a very responsible guy. I just remember, Andrea just said, but I don't want to be the kind of person, this is what my wife said, that just always plays it safe. And hear me, more of a metaphor than a recommendation. And I needed that, right? Because I'm the one going, no. He stays home. He never does anything, ever, that's dangerous, right? And my wife says, no, we're going to step out. Now, what's really interesting is that it's these that can really provide some help here in anxiety. And that's why, can I just tell you, I'm not asking you to be an elder necessarily, but I just want you to think that there are people watching you, taking cues from you about how to respond to what is going on in the world around us. Right? How many of you know, how many of you can think of somebody that's kind of looking at you, taking cues from you on how to respond to a crazy world? Can you see that? So in some sense, yes, there are elders that are over you, and in another sense, like you have an opportunity here. What I love is this little piece here in the middle that Peter describes. So listen to this. There are leaders that are over you, and they're not going to be domineering, they're going to love you and care for you. Therefore, humble yourselves. See, to humble yourself, in the best definition, is to have a right opinion of oneself. That's why the Romans text, that we should consider ourselves with this kind of a sober judgment, not thinking more, and honestly not thinking less, but thinking rightly of oneself. And when that happens, then all of a sudden, when we really get who we are, that is when there is an opportunity to trust. Humility teaches us to trust. See, when I'm not humble, I don't trust. I'm going to take care of it myself, thank you very much. See? That's pride. Pride is, I got this. Pride is, I don't need your help. Pride is a greater view of oneself. I don't need a leader. I'm my own leader, thank you very much. I'm a self-made woman. I'm a self-made man. Wow, okay. Wait till you find out that you can't do it. Wait till you're humbled. Because then all of a sudden, and I see this all the time, people that are very, very prideful, that don't have a right view of themselves, when circumstances of life give them the right view of themselves, I'm not in control, thought I was in control, I'm not in control, guess what comes from that? Anxiety. Yes? It's the natural result. Where does pride lead? Anxiety. Because I found out the truth. See, if you can handle the truth, I'm not in control. Like no matter what I do, my kid could be a type 1 diabetic. No matter what I do, he could also get diagnosed with Crohn's. No matter what I do, my sister could be a paraplegic. No matter what I do, my sister could get leukemia and die. No matter what I do, my son could get divorced. No matter what I do. See, that's the right understanding of myself. Like I don't have the ability to stop those things. And so you know what I do? I find leaders that I can trust who will help me through it. And at least that keeps the anxiety at bay. Does it not? It gives me like a fighting chance. It's interesting. There's a great article in the Gospel Coalition by Joe Carter on anxiety. Is anxiety a sin? And he lists 4 kinds of anxiety. I'm just going to list them real quickly just so we're clear of that. He says the first kind of anxiety that he describes is what I'm just going to label it as normal. Yeah, Andrea got a doctor's report. It came back. We need to go back and look for tests. She might have cancer. Like when my heart rate goes up, that's just normal. I don't need you to come and tell me, well, Jesus says not to worry. I get it. I'll try not to worry, but right now I'm appropriately concerned. Okay? That's normal. The kind of natural physiological responses, no pastor, no friend, no idiot, should make you feel guilty about natural responses to circumstances. Does that make sense? Now, where the lines are on these, good luck, because it gets tough. The second one is kind of like a normal, but is the physiological. The physiological response, the disorder. I have a sister who is OCD, and along with that is she's genuinely concerned. She's doing a lot better that AIDS is everywhere and that we're all going to get it and die. So it doesn't really match reality. And she physiologically can't do things. She didn't buy groceries for 10 years. Somebody else had to do it. Okay? And truly, chemical problems and counseling and lots of different things because of her OCD. And truly, there's a part of that I look at her, love her to death. And I remember because I tried to fix it with like really good Bible verses. And she just kind of looked at me. She was very patient with me. And she's 2 years younger than me. So we're really close because family is like 4 older kids and then me and my little sister. And I love her so much. And she would just kind of look at me and she goes, "You don't think I know these things? Like there's something going on inside of me that I don't understand." And it was really, really good. And by the way, I've learned a lot even about what she can do. So just because, she'll even tell you, just because I have this doesn't mean I don't have to trust Jesus. Just because I have this doesn't mean I can do whatever I want when I get anxious. So you should hear some of the brilliant stuff she has. The next kind actually is what is, not that it's sinful, but it's caused from sin. Like I'm a gambler, and now I'm really worried about our financial situation. Yeah, you should be. You've gambled all your money away. Like I've cheated on my wife. I deal with this a lot. I'm really afraid I'm going to lose my marriage. What happened? I cheated on my wife. Oh, yeah, you should be worried. So a lot of anxiety that we genuinely have is caused by our sin. Okay? Like I'm really afraid I'm going to make a terrible choice. Okay, why? Because I make terrible choices all the time. Oh yeah, no. So it's that sin-caused anxiety. And then the last one is actually just the sinful. By the way, it's good to realize, okay, so we're not dealing with this. We're not dealing with this. These two have some serious similarities. These two have some serious, there's a normalcy to these two. There's not a normalcy, but there's a connection between these two. Okay? And this one here is the part that I think this is a growing conversation that we need to have. And that on the one hand, I don't want to speak about it with finality, like I can diagnose all you people. I can't. I can't even figure out my own family. I have a hard enough time in my own head. But I still think we have to have conversations about this. because this is not an exaggeration. I almost do not know of a friend who has children who aren't medicated. I almost don't know of one. And I'm saying, okay, and part of that is cultural, and part of that is poor leadership. But I've never had anybody say, I've got the sinful kind of anxiety. I truly have. I'm not. Those people, good news is, those people don't exist anymore. There's no sinful anxiety anymore. It's all, everybody's got a reason for it. Okay. I'm a little doubtful of that, by the way. I think that we have to work through this. How do we work through this? Last answer. See, this is where, in the end, this all kind of fits under Him. Like, do you trust Him? Because if you trust Him, then you'll trust these leaders. Like, even when you don't agree with them, you'll trust them. But that could cost me. And this is the kind of trust that the Bible calls us to, both in our marriages as well as ultimately with God. Here's what I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing that your leaders could treat you poorly, but do you trust God when they do? Does that make sense? That's the Old Testament, isn't it? God didn't say, hey, trust me, I'll give you good leaders. What did He say? Trust me, I'll give you leaders, and if they fail, trust me, I got them. See, that's a God thing. Speaking of tornadoes, do you trust God? Do you trust God with your abilities, your lot in life, your situation, with the people that He has put over you? Do you trust Him in that sense? This really comes back down to a fundamental issue. Humility is a trust, not just of leaders, but it's a trust in God. To have a right understanding of oneself literally is to get where you are in all of the things, and then you have to discern, and who is the one that arranged these things, and that is God. And when you rightly understand yourself, then all of a sudden, this piece here, we can begin to deal with. Outside of it, as you kept saying over and over and over again, Nancy, these things are all connected together. Yeah, they really are. They really are. And so the next time you find yourself in so many different contexts being anxious, begin to ask, why? And I'm not just asking you, although it's a pretty good article, kind of short, but it's a pretty good article by Joe Carter. But much bigger than that. I mean, I think 1 Peter 5 is much better. And again, my final thought, because I'll cut it short. My final thought is this, is that please avoid the danger of what I have always gone through my whole life. I remember I was probably, I finally began to get a good grip on my fears, on my anxiety, on my disorder, when I was probably in my early 20s, maybe even a little bit more than that. It was when I started having, when I started having kids, so like 24, 25, 26, is when I first started getting it. And we had a problem with either Matthew or Mackenzie, some medical type thing. And my mom's a nurse, but more than that, she's my mom, and she can fix anything. And even though I knew that wasn't true, I think I thought it was true all at the same time. Have you ever believed things and not believed things at the same time? And I remember calling her, and my mom said, well, I'll pray. No. Don't need you to pray. I need you to fix it. And I didn't say that because I think I had kind of done the math, and I realized she couldn't. And I realized I couldn't. And I realized the doctor couldn't. And I realized that God didn't promise me He would. But the one thing He did say was, trust me. And at that moment, I had to make a decision. That's the decision. That helps you deal with leaders and anxiety and humility all in one swoop. Do you trust Him? And the siren ends. Let me pray. God, thank you for this time and for this book. Thank you for leaders that have both gotten it right and wrong. Father, I'm just so grateful that in my history with my family, church leaders have, I think with the best of intentions, hurt us. And I'm so grateful that my mom and dad trusted you in those moments. And I can think of other times in which I have been hurt by others. And thank you for, in those moments, even though I didn't get my response right all the time, thank you for teaching me to trust you. Father, may we find joy in our position in life. May we not seek, Father, to escape from the need to rely and to trust on you. Instead, may we pursue you fully and believe that no matter what the circumstances are around us, that the reality of you and of Jesus and of our eternal home, as Peter describes, may that be what sustains us. For your glory, for others' benefit, and for our joy, we pray. Amen. Love you guys.